Hi, welcome to the Outdoor Laboratory Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Capo, and today's podcast is a History Helix podcast. So, what is a History Helix podcast? Basically, in this series of podcasts, we're going to be focusing on historical figures of the outdoor profession and outdoor recreation who, much like how a helix in our DNA is our building blocks, form the building blocks of outdoor recreation and profession. And today's historical figure, his name is John Wesley Powell. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. John Wesley Powell is probably the biggest badass of the Colorado River, okay? He was an American explorer and he was a geologist. And what he went down for history for in the Colorado River was for being the first one to explore it. Before his time, the Colorado River on the map was just labeled as unexplored. And to Powell, that just was not enough. And we'll learn about what motivated him to go and seek out the Colorado River for himself. After reviewing a lot of Powell's accolades, I would say that he's perhaps the ideal outdoor professional and something that rising outdoor professionals or even people who are already in the field should emulate. He held jobs from professions that range from being an explorer, a soldier, a geologist, a botanist, and even an anthropologist. So he's done the gamut practically, he's all over the place. He's had his hands in all these things because he's pursued his interests. And I think that's something that a lot of outdoor professionals need to emulate is going out and having these experiences. We'll see how he was able to become such a revered professional in his field and in all the fields that he had. So how did he get to this outdoor professional status where he felt he can navigate the Colorado River safely? Powell was born on March 24th, 1834 in Mount Morris, New York. He was the child to immigrants who immigrated here from Shrewsbury, England. And his father moved around a lot, but he held jobs for being a farmer, a tailor, and even a preacher. And in their moving around, Powell, while they were living in Ohio, met a naturalist by the name of George Crookham. And George Crookham taught Powell the basics of field observation. And that's basically the basics of science. And that's what got Powell interested in botany and got Powell interested in the natural sciences. Now, when Powell was of age, his father wanted him to join the clergy and follow in his footsteps. But Powell said no. Powell decided to study botany and geology. His interest in botany helped him fund his adventures by going out and collecting specimens on these large trips in Ohio and on the Mississippi River during the 1850s. He attended Illinois College, Wheaton College, and Oberlin College for his educations. And a short list of some of his adventures was a 4-month walk across Wisconsin in 1855. 4 months of walking. I mean, you can go and do this today too. You can go hike the Appalachian Trail. And that's like a 3, 4, even 5-month hike. You can do the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail. You can do the Continental Divide Trail. You can go and hike these. But Powell was doing this before it was popular, before people did this for recreation. Powell was out there learning about the natural world. And I think that's something that we can commend, especially 4 months of walking. He rode down the Mississippi, starting from St. Anthony, Minnesota in 1856. He also rode down the Ohio River to reach St. Louis, and he rode down the Illinois, Mississippi, and Des Moines rivers to reach Iowa in 1858. So, needless to say, he was kind of well-versed in rowing, and so his interest in the Colorado River was just natural. But during Powell's lifetime, the Civil War happened, and Powell was a major in the Civil War, and he enlisted in the 20th Illinois Infantry at Hennepin. Now, Powell was a major, like I said, in In the Battle of Shiloh in 1862, Powell lost his right arm. A mini ball came out of nowhere during battle and shattered it. And he was forever handicapped. He was missing a whole arm. And so when he came back from war, many people would say, oh, he's handicapped and can't do anything. But his greatest achievement was still yet to come. And in 1860, this isn't his greatest achievement, what I'm about to say, but in 1867, after the war, he came back as the administrative head of the Illinois Natural History Society Museum. So he didn't let this stop him. He wanted to continue studying all about the natural world and all about even the history of the natural world. And he headed small expeditions to the Rocky Mountains to go and find specimens. Even though he was missing his arm, it didn't slow him down. And in fact, it probably sped him up because in 1869, John Wesley Powell decided to conquer an unfathomable task. So like I said, the Colorado River in John Wesley Powell's time was labeled as unexplored. Maybe kind of like a frontier, like a place that nobody really knew about, that only tales were said. And in fact, there were tales of massive waterfalls and raging rapids. But this danger didn't put off Powell because the allure of the canyon was too much for him to ignore. On the day that he decided to set out from his hometown to go to the Green River Station, the newspaper of his hometown documented this. This is what they said before he left. It would be impossible for a boat constructed of any known material upon any conceivable plan to live through the canyon. Supporting words, right? Super supporting. Powell's boats were made of wood, not the inflatable rafts that we have today. One wrong wave and a boat and all its supplies will go under, will get drowned. One unseen rock and the bow of the boat can shatter. So not only did they have these fragile boats, but they also had no real rapid running experience. Powell went with 9 other men, and out of all of them, including Powell, they had no extensive, large, rapid reading water experience. They didn't know how to read these rapids correctly. And I mean, yes, Powell did row on all these rivers, but these were slow-moving, flowing rivers that were more flat water than raging rapids that you could see on the Colorado River. And so they not only had to navigate in fragile boats, but they had to learn how to navigate in these raging rapids. And it's kind of a brave task to use the Colorado River as your classroom to learn this. That's a task that they took on, because on May 24th, 1869, Powell and his crew pushed their boats into the current of the mighty Colorado River. And once they set off in this adventure and headed down the canyon, the crew had no choice but to continue forward. Reason being is, you're in the canyon. You can't just hike out. You have walls of rock around you. You cannot just leave. The only way out is forward through the rapids. And this expedition would not only prove dangerous, but challenging for some of the men in his crew, if not all of the men in the crew. And actually, something that happened on this trip, which is quite sad, is an incident that happened at Separation Canyon. So when I was able to do my Colorado River experience, I think I talked about this in the last podcast, I was able to go to this canyon. I was able to see where this happened. I was able to ride the rapid that was there. And of course, it was a different rapid because of dam construction. But I was able to go and see where this happened. I was able to go to the plaque. I was able to see where this historical event happened. And at Separation Canyon, O.G. Howland, his brother Seneca, and Bill Dunn, who were all crew members of the John Wesley Powell of the Colorado River trip, decided that they were going to leave. They saw Separation Rapid, and they said, "There's no way that we can make this one. And so they decided that morning they were going to leave, and Powell left them a boat just in case they changed their minds. And the three men hiked up as best as they could out of the canyon. And the remainder of Powell's crew went down the rapid, no problem. And this rapid was actually one of the last two larger remaining rapids on the Colorado River until they hit what is now Lake Mead, which is calmer water. So these three men kind of backed out when it was the end, you know. They couldn't keep going forward, but they had no clue of knowing that this was the end or not. They had no clue what was ahead of them. They set up for 10 months of provisions. They had no clue. And so John Wesley Powell and the rest of his crew, they sailed down the rapid. They make it to Lake Mead, and that's where they meet up with some fishermen, and they were able to get out. And after around 3 months of the trip and not hearing back from the men that had left, they presumed that they were dead. And about a year later, a Mormon scout reported to, his name was Jacob Hablin, reported to John Wesley Powell that, in fact, the three men were killed by Native Americans. Now, some critics speculate that these men were not killed by Native Americans. In fact, they might have been killed by Mormons who were settling in the area and who were hostile during this time towards white men. Example, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which we will talk about in a later podcast. But that's what they were led to believe, is that these three men were dead. And they haven't found their bodies as of today. They still have not found them. So we don't know if they were Native Americans, if the heat got to them, or if Mormons killed them. And I was going to say this for the end of the podcast, but I think it's actually quite appropriate right now, because John Wesley Powell was able to end his trip. He was able to get out successfully and was able to ride the Colorado River. And in this book that I recommend you guys read, Down the Great Unknown, the beginning pages, there's a little excerpt from the Colorado River at the foot of the Grand Canyon on August 30th, 1869. The fishermen kept their gaze focused intently on the river, but it was not fish they were looking for. A splintered plank from a broken boat, a torn shirt, perhaps a lifeless body. These were the fragments or relics they had been instructed to watch for. Only a few miles upstream, 6 exhausted men in 2 boats pushed themselves into the current. Ragged, half-starved, burnt black by 98 days in the desert sun, the men were in sorry shape. Explorers who dreamed of gold and glory, they had been given up dead for weeks. Fearful disaster, the Chicago Tribune had trumpeted on the front page on July 3rd. The entire party, save one man, had been engulfed in a moment. But they have not drowned. They are still alive, barely, still hoping they have food and strength enough to grope their way to safety. Now, if that's not a life-changing outdoor experience, I don't know what is. These men were pushed to their breaking point. They were ragged, half-scarred, burnt from the sun. They lost men. They lost boats. You know, it's a miraculous feat, I think, that John Wesley Powell was able to complete this. But that was not enough for John Wesley Powell. That is who this man is. That was not enough for him. When he got back from his trip, he came back a hero, and he started doing lectures to get funding for a second expedition. And his 1871 expedition would produce maps and scientific publications about the Colorado River. And his work as a geologist on his expeditions in the Colorado River led him to become the director of the United States Geological Survey in 1881, where he served for 13 years. He was able to become practically the head of his profession, you know, because of his accolades, because of his experience. And He died on September 23rd, 1902, in Maine. He died of a brain hemorrhage, lived a decent, long life, and he's buried now in the Arlington Cemetery for the Civil War veterans. And you guys can go visit his grave if you ever are in that area. So, but why did I tell you about John Wesley Powell? What's the whole point? So sure, this guy ran the river. This guy's had all these experiences in geology and in botany and in anthropology. He's had all these times to be a leader, and so sure, yeah. What's the point, man? I'll tell you the point. John Wesley Powell was not just an explorer, but he was an advocate for the outdoors. He was an advocate for his classroom. He was an advocate for his laboratory, the outdoors. And you know, when the government has to form regulations and laws regarding the environment, they don't always follow the advice of scientists. Even though it seems like common sense to give the decision-making advice, whatever you want to call, to the people who we've established as experts in the field of nature, and we don't want to follow their advice, it seems kind of counterproductive. Then why do we even have scientists if we're not going to pay attention to what they have to say? Why are we going to fund their trips? Why are we going to fund their research if we're not going to follow what they have to offer us? But our government in the past has not followed this common sense, and we've decided to pass laws and regulations that do not benefit nature, and in fact harm it. And these past decisions have been fueled by motives that are quite selfish and that are focused more on viewing the natural world as a resource to be cultivated and not a resource to be protected. Now, I understand that there's other things to be considered when doing governmental regulations. There's people, there's progress, there's a need for power, but the way that we have gone about it in the past has not been the most sustainable, has not been the best way to do so. And we can even see this in the modern era with our politicians who are arguing the credibility of climate change, who are increasing governmental authorizations for mining of natural resources and not taking care of old mines that are inactive, not being mined out, but are still there, not being cleaned up. And the pollution that's caused by producing power. Like, we're not putting our best effort forward in protecting nature, even in today's world. And on Powell's second trip down the Colorado River, he decided that he was going to come up with a way to sustainably populate the West. Now, the government was wanting to do this anyway. They had the Senate Select Committee on Irrigation and Reclamation of Arid Lands. And basically what this select committee oversaw was the population of the West by bringing water to these desert lands. The committee was composed of senators from these states who were hoping that irrigation would bring more wealth to their state due to the projected influx of people who would come. Now, they were hoping that Powell would figure out a way to make this a booming place, to make this an Eden. But Powell's advice didn't meet their expectations. There's not enough water in the desert, believe it or not, to irrigate it. So there wasn't enough water to irrigate the West the way that these politicians wanted it to happen. Powell said that by disturbing these water cycles in this area, that there's a way that we need to populate it correctly. And what he said was introducing a map that I'll put up here to show you that didn't draw boundaries because of politics or topography, but drew boundaries based on water, drew state boundaries based on where the water flowed. And this made the politicians quite upset because they weren't able to make the West this booming place that they wanted it to make it. And the reason why Powell fought for this so hard and why he said that his steps would be so good is because if you were to mess up the water flow in these areas, you would also be messing up the water cycle, messing with natural phenomena, and you would have long-lasting effects after you've messed with these areas and after you've done this. And you know, we see that today. Some critics even think that the Dust Bowl of the 1930s would not have happened if we would have followed Powell's advice. The droughts that we're seeing now in the West, in California, and particularly the wildfires, it might not be so dry if we would have followed what Powell said. And Powell used his map to stress our nation's need to use our natural resources more sustainably. He set an example that proves still to this day. He's not just a scientist of the past, but his character is something that we must emulate as advocates of the natural world, of nature. We need to emulate what he has to say, because when facing issues like restoration, climate change, and resource use, Powell said that we don't need to only focus on the needs of our civilization, but also on the needs of the land. And if you think about it, without a healthy landscape, without a healthy environment around us, we won't be able to have the commerce that we have. We'd be struggling to fix the basis, the foundation of what our civilization stands on, which is nature. We would have to struggle to fix what we've broken. That's what we would be doing if we don't put nature's best interests forward nowadays, if we don't follow Powell's example. And you know, Powell not only relates on a scientific level, I think he could also relate to us today individually. You've heard everything that Powell's accomplished. Powell is the director of the United States Geological Survey. He held the leader of the Natural History Societies. He was a major in the Army. He did so many adventures and explorations. He went into an unexplored part of America and explored it, made the maps for it. Was a mover, a shaker in his profession. He was the ideal outdoor professional. Ideal. But Powell was 5 feet, 6.5 inches, 120 pounds, maybe 140 pounds if he still had his arm, but 120 pounds. He was handicapped. He lost his arm, something that might kill the spirit of any other person. And he went and said, oh, I'm gonna go explore this place that's not explored. He didn't let doubt hold him down. He had confidence in his ability. He didn't focus on his faults of not having an arm. He focused on his strengths of being a leader. And he didn't let doubt chain him from getting out and having these experiences. And I feel like perhaps some outdoor novices or people who are just starting on going outside might fall in the same category of doubting themselves in these outdoor experiences. Maybe not going on a trip because they don't trust themselves physically, which is a great concern. Maybe not going out because it's a little bit too cold. Maybe not going out because they don't know if they can hike the mountain, but you will never know if you don't try. If John Wesley Powell never tried going down the Colorado River, we wouldn't have the whitewater profession that we have today, the big industry that we have today. He was one of the pioneers in whitewater rafting. He's the one that changed the paradigms of people of, oh shoot, we can go down rapids. That's crazy. Think about that. If he never did that because he lost his arm, because he doubted himself, we wouldn't have what we have today. And I feel like when you don't have these experiences because you're doubting yourself, you don't understand the ripple effect you might have. Because you can go and influence people with your experience, with your memories. You can influence people with what you've done, how you've tested yourself. And testing yourself in the outdoor laboratory, that's where you can really conduct these experiments. And so I hope you guys learned a lot from who John Wesley Powell was as a person. And I hope that you guys learned from his character. I hope you guys also get a little motivated from him to go out and have some experiences for yourself. Go and make memories. Have a nice day.